Welcome to HOA Nuisance Files. The HOA wanted control, not safety. You are about to get a reinspection fee. That was the first thing Diane Jackson yelled at me, standing in my driveway with her phone on a gimbal pointed at my face like she was filming a documentary about crimes against Silverleaf HOA. She had that look, the one where every word was a trap and every second was evidence. I had just gotten the approval email on my phone. The timestamp said 10:42 a.m., and my contractor's truck was already backing into the cul-de-sac. Diane claimed I started work before approval hit my inbox, and she loved technicalities. I work customer service supervision for a large insurance call center, and I record every call legally. Every shift, every escalation. It is how I stay out of trouble when someone claims I said something I did not say. So when Diane showed up 3 weeks ago with her first fence complaint, I hit record on my phone and kept it rolling. Every interaction, every email read aloud, every board meeting I attended as a guest, all of it backed up to cloud storage with timestamps that could not be altered. Diane did not know that yet. She stepped closer, her voice rising. The approval came at 10:41, she said. Your truck was moving at 10:40. That is a violation of the pre-commencement notification standard. The fence project is suspended pending a full architectural review, and you owe a $200 reinspection fee. I kept my phone in my pocket, recording light invisible through the fabric, and I smiled just enough to let her know I was not panicking. Diane. The email timestamp is 10:42. I can show you right now. She waved me off like I was a child offering fake homework. Timestamps can be manipulated, she said. I have a witness who saw your contractor unload materials before 10:30. That was a lie. My contractor arrived at 10:15 and sat in his truck drinking coffee until I got the email. I watched him through my front window. But Diane did not care about truth. She cared about enforcement stats and the architectural committee chair title she wore like a crown. My contractor, a guy named Ray who had been building fences in Anchorage for 20 years, climbed out of the truck and walked over. He looked at Diane, then at me, then back at Diane. Lady, I have been sitting here since 10:15 waiting for the green light. I did not touch a single panel until he gave me the thumbs up. Diane turned her gimbal toward Ray like she was about to cross-examine him on court TV. Your testimony is noted, she said, voice dripping with fake formality. But you are not the permit holder. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. That was the first time she used her catchphrase. She would say it again, louder, in front of more people. And every time it would dig her hole a little deeper. I took a breath. Diane, I followed the process exactly. I submitted my application 4 weeks ago. I waited for approval. I got it this morning. I started work after I got it. If you want to issue a violation, go ahead, but I am going to challenge it with the full board. Her smile got wider. The full board meets in 3 weeks, she said. Until then, this project is on hold and you are accruing daily non-compliance fees of $50 per day. Also, your contractor needs to remove all materials from the property line setback area immediately, or I will call a tow truck for obstruction. Ray looked at me. I looked at Ray. We both knew the setback rules. The panels were 4 feet inside my property line. Diane was just making up new measurements. I pulled out my phone, held it up so she could see the screen was facing away, no readable text, and I said it calm and clear. Diane, I am recording this conversation for my records. You just claimed my materials are in the setback, but the survey shows they are not. Are you saying the survey is wrong? She flinched. Just a micro expression. Barely a half second, but I caught it. Her gimbal dipped an inch and her voice got sharper. I do not need to justify my enforcement decisions to you. The Architectural Committee has full discretion under Article 7 of the Covenants. That was when I knew she was winging it. Article 7 covered design standards, not setback enforcement. I let it go for now, because I needed her to keep talking. The more she invented on the spot, the better my case would be later. Ray started unloading anyway, slow and methodical, setting each fence panel in a neat row on my driveway, well inside the property line. Diane watched him like a hawk, her gimbal swiveling, trying to catch some angle that would look like a violation. She did not find one, but she took 40 photos anyway, each one marked with that bright orange stamp on her clipboard, the same stamp she used on every non-compliance report. I live in a master-planned community outside Anchorage called Silverleaf, where fences are treated like sacred law and every architectural decision goes through a committee that moves slower than glaciers but enforces faster than lightning. The neighborhood is all matching earth tones, strict height limits, and mailbox clusters that look like tiny historic monuments. Diane had been Architectural Committee Chair for 6 years, and in that time she had perfected the art of using vague safety language and selective rule readings to make homeowners feel guilty without ever proving a violation. My health has been fragile for the past year. Sleep disruption makes everything worse. Stress compounds it. I moved here because my sister lives 2 blocks away, and I needed family close after a rough patch. The HOA was supposed to be professional, organized, predictable. Instead, I got Diane, who treated enforcement like a performance art piece and neighbors like a captive audience. She stood up from her crouch, brushed wet dirt off her knee, and turned her gimbal back toward me. I am filing an emergency enforcement motion with the board, she said. You will receive a formal hearing notice within 48 hours. If you proceed with installation before that hearing, the fines will triple and we can pursue a lien. I nodded slowly. Diane, can I ask you something? She tilted her head, suspicious. What? When did the board authorize you to call emergency hearings for fence projects? Her face went blank for half a second, then she recovered. I have discretionary authority under my role as committee chair. Ray finished unloading and climbed back into his truck. He gave me a look that said I am not getting in the middle of this, then pulled out of the driveway and idled at the curb. I walked over to his window. Ray, I am going to need you to hold off for a couple days. I will pay you for today and I will call you when it is clear to start. He shrugged. Your money, he said. But if this drags out, I have other jobs lined up. I cannot sit around waiting for HOA drama to resolve itself. I understood. I told him I would move fast. Diane was still standing in my driveway, gimbal recording the whole exchange. When I walked back, she was smiling again. Smart choice, she said. Compliance is always easier than conflict. I did not respond. I just walked inside, shut the door, and pulled out my laptop. I had been keeping a folder labeled Silverleaf HOA documentation since the day I submitted my fence application. Inside that folder were PDFs of every email, every form, every meeting agenda, and every revision to the architectural guidelines over the past 2 years. I also had audio recordings of 3 board meetings where Diane had made statements about enforcement priorities, budget concerns, and her personal opinions about property owners who pushed back. I opened the most recent board meeting audio. It was from 2 weeks ago, right after I submitted my fence application. Diane had been talking about enforcement trends and she said something interesting. She said, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." At the time, it got a nervous laugh from one board member and silence from the others. I bookmarked that moment and saved the timestamp. That line would come back to haunt her. I also had a recording from 3 weeks ago where Diane mentioned that the architectural committee was discussing a new interpretation of the setback rules to close loopholes. That interpretation was never voted on by the full board. It was never added to the official guidelines. But Diane had been enforcing it anyway, using the phrase safety concern to justify measurements that did not match the written rules. I acted like I was backing down, because timing was the whole weapon. I needed her to escalate. I needed her to commit more violations on the record. I needed her to believe she had already won. The next day, I got the hearing notice in my mailbox. It was dated 2 days earlier, which was impossible, because Diane had only filed the motion yesterday. The notice also included a list of alleged violations, some of which had nothing to do with my fence. One line claimed I had failed to submit a landscape impact assessment, which was not required for fence projects under 50 linear feet. Another line claimed my contractor was unlicensed, which was false and easily disproven. I took photos of the notice, front and back, including the date stamp and the bright orange stamp that Diane used on everything. Then I walked 2 blocks to my sister's house. Her name is Lauren, and she works as a project manager for a state agency. She is organized, calm, and ruthless when someone tries to cheat the system. I needed her to witness what was happening and to help me sort through the next steps. Lauren read the notice twice, then looked at me. "This is backdated," she said, "and half these violations are invented. What is her angle?" I told her about the timeline, the phantom setback rule, the emergency hearing threat, and the recording I had of Diane admitting enforcement could happen before explanations. Lauren nodded slowly. "She is trying to bury you in procedural confusion so you miss deadlines and default into fines. That is a tactic. It works on people who do not keep records." I smiled. Good thing I keep records. Lauren pulled out her laptop and opened the Silverleaf HOA website. She navigated to the meeting minutes archive and pulled up the minutes from 2 weeks ago, the same meeting where Diane made the tall first comment. The official minutes did not include that comment. In fact, the enforcement discussion section was summarized in 2 bland sentences that made it sound like a boring procedural update. I had the audio. The minutes did not match. Lauren leaned back in her chair. "They altered the minutes after the meeting," she said. "That is a records violation. If you can prove it, that is grounds for a full audit and possible board removal." I told her I had the audio, time-stamped and backed up. Lauren grinned. "Then you have a trump card. Do not play it yet. Let her dig deeper first." That was the plan. I would go to the hearing, I would present my timeline and my photos and my survey, and I would let Diane overreach. When she said something definitive, something she could not walk back, I would deploy the records request response revealing the HOA altered the minutes after the meeting. I would force her to answer a yes or no question, then drop the document that contradicted her. But first, I had to survive the next 72 hours without losing my mind. I had to pick up my sister's husband from the airport on the same day as the hearing. A strict time window because his connecting flight was tight, and he had no backup ride. Diane knew about my schedule because I had mentioned it in an email when I requested a hearing delay. She denied the delay and moved the hearing to exactly the time I needed to leave. The hearing was set for Thursday at 4 p.m. in the Silverleaf Community Center, a small building near the mailbox clusters that doubled as a meeting room and event space. I drove past it on Tuesday and saw Diane setting up a folding table, laying out printed packets with that bright orange stamp on every cover page. She was preparing like this was a trial, complete with a gavel she had bought online and a nameplate that said Architectural Committee Chair in gold lettering. I spent Tuesday night reviewing my evidence. I had the approval email with the timestamp. I had the survey showing the setback was correct. I had the contractor's statement. I had the audio of Diane claiming she could tow first and explain later. I had the original meeting minutes and the altered version. I had photos of the bright orange stamp on every violation notice she had ever issued me, all dated inconsistently, some with metadata that proved they were created days after the alleged violation date. Wednesday morning, I got a knock on my door. It was a passerby I did not recognize, a neighbor from 3 streets over, holding up a phone with the screen turned away. He introduced himself as Mark. He said he had been walking his dog past my property on the day Diane confronted me, and he had filmed the whole thing from across the street because it looked like a conflict, and he wanted to make sure no one got hurt. Mark said he heard Diane yelling about reinspection fees, and he heard her claim the truck was unloading early. He said his video had clear audio and it contradicted her version. He also said he had seen Diane do this to 2 other neighbors in the past year, both times over minor rule disputes that turned into drawn-out enforcement battles. One neighbor eventually sold their house and moved. The other paid $3,000 in fines and legal fees just to make it stop. I asked Mark if he would be willing to come to the hearing and show the video. He hesitated. He said Diane had a reputation for retaliation and he did not want to end up on her list. I understood. But I also told him that if he did nothing, Diane would keep doing this to other people. He thought about it for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be there," he said. "But I am not going to say more than I have to." That was enough. Wednesday afternoon, I got an email from Diane. It was long, formal, and filled with legal-sounding language that did not actually cite any real statutes. She claimed I had violated Section 12 of the covenants by proceeding without final design approval, even though my approval email explicitly said final approval granted. She claimed I had violated Section 18 by failing to notify adjacent property owners, even though the application process did not require that notification. She claimed I had violated Section 23 by creating a safety hazard, even though no safety inspection had been conducted and no hazard had been identified. At the end of the email, she wrote, "The board has authorized me to impose an immediate lien on your property if you do not voluntarily withdraw your fence application and pay all outstanding fees by Thursday morning. The total owed is currently $850, including reinspection fees, administrative fees, and late fees." I read it twice, then forwarded it to Lauren. She called me 10 seconds later. "She is bluffing," Lauren said. "The board cannot authorize a lien without a full hearing and a vote. She is trying to scare you into paying before the hearing so she does not have to defend her case." I asked Lauren what I should do. She said, "Do nothing. Show up Thursday. Bring your evidence. Make her prove her claims in front of witnesses." If you are enjoying this HOA nightmare, hit that like button and subscribe, because this is only going to get messier from here. Thursday morning, I woke up early and reviewed my notes one more time. I printed copies of the approval email, the survey, the contractor statement, and the photo metadata log. I did not print the audio transcript yet. That was my trump card and I was saving it for the right moment. At 3:30 p.m., I drove to the community center. The parking lot was already half full. I recognized a few cars from the neighborhood, including Diane's SUV parked in the front row. I also saw Mark's sedan near the back. He gave me a small nod through the windshield. Inside, the community center was set up like a courtroom. Diane sat at the head table with 2 other board members, a man named Ron who served as treasurer and a woman named Patricia who served as secretary. Ron looked uncomfortable. Patricia looked bored. Diane looked like she was about to win an award. There were about 15 people in the audience, most of them neighbors who had heard about the hearing through the community email list. Some of them were there to watch the drama. Some of them were there because Diane had sent targeted emails suggesting I was building an unsafe structure, and they should attend to voice concerns. Diane banged her gavel at exactly 4 p.m. "This emergency architectural hearing is now in session," she said. The matter before the committee is the unauthorized fence installation at 4721 Caribou Lane. The property owner is present and will have an opportunity to respond to the allegations. She read the allegations slowly, emphasizing every invented violation like she was narrating a crime documentary. When she finished, she looked at me. "Do you have a statement?" I stood up. "I do," I said. "I submitted my fence application on September 10th. I received final approval on October 19th at 10:42 a.m. I began work after I received that approval. I have the email, the survey, and a witness statement from my contractor. I also have video evidence from a neighbor who was present during the initial confrontation. All of my materials are within the setback limits, and all of my permits are in order." Diane smiled. "The approval email is not relevant," she said, "because the work began before the email was processed by the management company. The timestamp on your email does not reflect the official processing time." That was a new claim. She had not mentioned processing time before. I let her keep talking. She continued. "The Architectural Committee has discretion to revoke approval if the work does not match the submitted plans. Based on my site inspection, the fence panels are 6 inches taller than the approved height, and the color does not match the approved stain." That was false. The panels were exactly the approved height, and the stain was the approved color. I had photos and receipts. But I did not interrupt. I wanted her to commit fully to the lie. Ron, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "Diane, do we have measurements from the site inspection?" Diane waved her hand. "I took measurements on site. They are in my notes." Patricia, the secretary, flipped through a binder. "I do not see a site inspection report in the file." Diane's smile tightened. "I will submit it after the hearing." That was when I knew I had her. She was making it up in real time, and the other board members were starting to notice. I raised my hand. "Diane, can I ask a procedural question?" She nodded, still smiling. "When was the site inspection conducted?" She glanced at her notes. "October 20th. I nodded slowly. "And when did you take the measurements?" "On site. During the inspection." I pulled out my phone, screen turned away, and held it up. "Diane, I was home all day on October 20th. No one from the HOA came to my property. Are you saying you conducted an inspection without notifying me or entering the property?" Her smile faded. I observed from the street. I kept my voice calm. "The fence panels are 40 feet from the street. You cannot measure height or color accuracy from that distance. Did you enter my property without permission?" She did not answer. Ron and Patricia were both staring at her now. I pressed. "Diane, yes or no? Did you enter my property to take measurements?" She hesitated, then said, "I do not need permission to enforce HOA rules." That was the moment. I had her on the record claiming she could trespass for enforcement. I nodded slowly and sat back down. Mark stood up from the back row. "Excuse me," he said. "I have video from the day this started. It shows the truck arriving after 10 a.m., and it shows Diane making claims that do not match what actually happened. Can I play it for the committee?" Diane's face went pale. "That is not part of the hearing record," she said quickly. "We cannot accept evidence that was not submitted in advance." Ron leaned forward. "Actually, we can. The bylaws allow witness testimony and supporting materials at the discretion of the chair. Diane, do you want to accept the video?" Diane looked trapped. If she said no, it would look like she was hiding something. If she said yes, the video would expose her lies. She chose the third option. She stood up and said, "I am calling a 10-minute recess." She walked out of the room fast, phone in hand, and I heard her making a call in the hallway. I could not hear the words, but the tone was frantic. Ron and Patricia stayed at the table. Ron looked at me. "Do you have copies of everything you mentioned?" I handed him the folder. He flipped through it slowly, then showed it to Patricia. She read the approval email, checked the timestamp, and nodded. "This all looks correct," she said quietly. Diane came back into the room 5 minutes later. Her face was red and her gimbal was off. She sat down and banged the gavel. "The hearing is resumed," she said. "After reviewing the procedural rules, I have determined that witness video is not admissible unless it was submitted 72 hours in advance. The committee will proceed based on the written record only." Mark sat down, frustrated. I stood up again. "Diane, can I ask another procedural question?" She glared at me. "What?" "When did the board authorize this emergency hearing?" She blinked. "I already told you. I have discretionary authority." I pulled out a printed page from my folder. This is the board meeting agenda from 2 weeks ago. It lists enforcement policy discussions but no authorization for emergency hearings. Can you point me to the section where the board granted you that authority? She did not answer. I continued. "I also have audio from that meeting. Would you like me to play it for the committee?" Her face went from red to white. "You recorded a board meeting?" I nodded. "It is legal in Alaska as long as one party consents." I consented. "The recording is time-stamped and unedited. It includes a discussion where you said, and I quote, 'We can tow first and explain later.' That is how enforcement works. Would you like to hear it?" Ron leaned forward. "Diane, is that accurate?" She stammered. "That was taken out of context." I kept going. "I also have the original meeting minutes from that session and the revised minutes that were posted online 3 days later. The revised minutes do not include your comment about towing first. They also do not include the discussion about reinterpreting setback rules without a board vote. Would you like me to submit both versions so the committee can compare them?" Patricia looked at Diane. "Did we alter the minutes after the meeting?" Diane did not answer. She just stared at me, her gimbal sitting silent on the table. I took a breath. "Diane, I am going to ask you a yes or no question and I need you to answer it clearly for the record. Did the board vote to authorize you to call this emergency hearing?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then said quietly, "No." Ron and Patricia both sat back in their chairs. Ron looked at me. "Do you have any other evidence you want to present?" I handed him the printed transcript of the altered minutes, side by side with the original audio timestamps. He read it, then passed it to Patricia. She read it, then looked at Diane. "This is a serious problem," she said. Diane stood up. "I need to consult with the HOA attorney before we proceed." Ron shook his head. "We are going to table this hearing until the full board can review these materials. In the meantime, all fines and liens related to this case are suspended. The homeowner is authorized to proceed with the approved fence installation." Diane did not say anything. She just gathered her papers, picked up her gimbal, and walked out of the room. The audience erupted in whispers. A few neighbors came up to me and asked for copies of my evidence because they were dealing with similar issues. Mark walked over and shook my hand. "That was incredible," he said. "I have been dealing with her crap for 2 years, and I never knew we could push back like that." I thanked him and headed to my car. I still had to pick up my brother-in-law from the airport, and I was already running late. I made it with 10 minutes to spare. The next week, the HOA management company called me. They said they were conducting an internal review of recent enforcement actions, and they wanted to confirm my timeline. I sent them everything: the emails, the audio, the altered minutes, the photos. 2 days later, They called back and said Diane had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full audit. The audit took 3 weeks. During that time, I installed my fence. Ray came back, finished the job in 2 days, and it looked perfect. The height was correct. The color was correct. The setback was correct. No one from the HOA said a word. The audit report came out in early November. It found that Diane had issued over 40 violation notices in the past year using inconsistent standards, backdated documents, and unauthorized fee structures. It found that she had altered meeting minutes on 3 separate occasions to remove comments that contradicted her enforcement positions. It found that she had collected over $12,000 in late fees and reinspection fees that were not authorized by the board or the management company. The HOA attorney reviewed the report and sent a letter to every homeowner who had been charged fees in the past year. The letter said the fees were being refunded in full, and the HOA was implementing a new enforcement checklist that limited the architectural committee chair's discretionary authority. The board called a special meeting in late November to discuss Diane's future. She showed up with her gimbal and her gavel, but she did not get to use either. The board voted to remove her as architectural committee chair and to refer the altered minutes issue to the HOA attorney for further review. The attorney attended the meeting and, in plain language that everyone could understand, explained that altering official records after a meeting is a violation of state nonprofit corporation law and could result in personal liability for the individuals involved. Diane got corrected by the HOA attorney in plain language, and she did not say a word in response. 2 weeks later, a group of neighbors filed paperwork for a board election challenge that flipped the power dynamic. They nominated 3 new candidates who promised to reform the enforcement process and to implement transparent procedures. The election was held in January. All 3 reform candidates won. Diane did not run for re-election. The new board adopted the enforcement checklist that the attorney had recommended. It required all violation notices to include photographic evidence, specific rule citations, and a clear appeals process. It required all fines to be approved by a majority vote of the full board. It required all meeting minutes to be reviewed and approved within 72 hours with no alterations allowed after the initial draft period. The refund checks went out in February. I got $850 back. Mark got $400. Another neighbor got $2,000. In total, the HOA refunded over $12,000 across the neighborhood, all tied to Diane's unauthorized fees and invented violations. I saw Diane one more time after that. It was at the mailbox cluster in March, right around the time the snow was starting to melt. She was picking up a package and I was checking my mail. We made eye contact for half a second. She did not say anything. She just turned and walked away, no gimbal, no clipboard, no bright orange stamp. A few weeks later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Diane had moved out of Silverleaf. Someone said she bought a condo in a building with no HOA. I do not know if that is true, but I hope it is. Maybe she learned something. Maybe she did not. Either way, she is not my problem anymore. The fence is still standing. It is exactly the height it is supposed to be, exactly the color it is supposed to be, and exactly where it is supposed to be. Every time I look at it, I think about that first day when Diane showed up yelling about reinspection fees and technicalities. I think about how close I came to just paying the fines and moving on because it felt easier than fighting. But I did not. I kept records, I stayed calm, I let her overreach. And when the moment was right, I deployed the evidence that she could not refute. The funny thing is, the karma moment that everyone talks about now is not the refund or the audit or even the board election. It is the recording from the November special meeting where Diane repeated her favorite line one more time. Someone asked her why she had altered the minutes, and she said, "The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I." And everyone in the room, including the attorney, heard it on the recording that was being made for the official record. It became the evidence that sealed her removal. The new board is not perfect, but it is better. They respond to emails. They follow the rules. They do not invent fees or backdate documents. And when someone submits a fence application now, it gets processed in 2 weeks instead of 4, with clear approval language and no technicalities. I still record my calls at work. I still keep backups of every email. And I still keep my phone ready, screen turned away, recording light invisible, just in case someone decides that the rules do not care about my excuses. Because now I know that the rules work both ways, and the people who love technicalities the most are often the ones who get caught by them in the end. Thanks for watching, and I will be back soon.